Your Honor, with the court's permission, may I stand at the podium? Thank you. Your Honor, obviously this is a somber day, I would call it. It's a moment that is difficult for, certainly most importantly, Mr. Pessoa. He's got a whole gallery of people in support of him, and most, if not all, are family members or close dear friends of his. And I think they're deeply affected by what's going on and what's about to happen. It's also a sobering moment, and it's a bit of a disheartening moment for me as well, because as the court's aware, based upon my submission, I formed a personal relationship with Mr. Pessoa, and that's essentially what I want to address the court on. And with the court's permission, I want to do that, and then I'm going to defer to Attorney Blythe to talk about the defense recommendation for sentence. And then you will also hear from Officer Michael Sylvia of the Fall River Police Department. And lastly, but most importantly, the court is going to hear from Mr. Pessoa.
Okay, thank you.
I met Mr. Pessoa based upon my representation of him at the outset. I came into the courtroom, I think it was courtroom 8 at the time, and I was retained to represent him. I knew little to nothing about the case, and I knew nothing about Mr. Pessoa at all. My first interaction with him was in lockup, and my disappointment with this case essentially started with the way in which Mr. Pessoa was prosecuted by this county. He was a police officer for 19 years. There was an investigation and there were indictments, but he was placed in custody, and there was a request for bail. Despite his lack of criminal record, his ties with the community, and all the good that he did for the Fall River Police Department in his career. And this won't define Mr. Pessoa, and it may have been a bad choice that Mr. Pessoa made that day in February 2019. But when I had interacted with him in court and we left, we had a very brief conversation, and shortly thereafter he came to my office. And when we met for the first time, I immediately saw Mr. Pessoa for the person that he is and who he stands before the court to be, which is an honorable guy and an intelligent guy. And we had a conversation, and it struck me how different he was from, quite frankly, most of the clients that I've represented in my 25 years. I understood where Mr. Pessoa was coming from. I believed in his case. I'm disappointed in the verdict, but I still believe in Mr. Pessoa's case. But we respect the verdict of the jury, and certainly respect what this court will dispense as it pertains to sentencing. The more that I interacted with Mr. Pessoa, Your Honor, I found that my initial reaction to him was accurate. He was somebody that was loyal. He was somebody who has high character. And at the time, simultaneous to my law practice, I was opening a restaurant with Attorney Blythe, and we were doing our best to acquire people to work at that restaurant. And given Mr. Pessoa's unemployment at the time, and given my fondness of him, I thought it would be a good idea to offer him a job. Mr. Pessoa came in thinking that we were going to talk about his case, but we didn't. We talked about the other business venture that we had, and how I thought Mr. Pessoa would have an opportunity working for me. And Mr. Pessoa was humble, he was appreciative, he accepted, but what was most telling to me as to who Mr. Pessoa was and continues to be is that Mr. Pessoa thereafter sent me a lengthy email, a well thought out, thorough email, explaining his stellar educational background, which the court is aware that he graduated cum laude, with a college degree, and that he thought he could be better utilized in a managerial position at the restaurant. I paused, quite frankly, because though I was a new restaurateur, Mr. Pessoa had no experience in the business, and being a police officer, I didn't know, quite frankly, how that would translate. But again, given my fondness of him and my thought that Mr. Pessoa would be able to adapt and work hard, based upon what I learned from not only him, but other people in his family who I came to know, the opportunity was awarded him, and he took full advantage of it. That summer, which would have been the summer of 2021, Mr. Pessoa every day came to that restaurant and assisted all of us in trying to get that restaurant up and running. Painting, construction, carrying, cleaning, anything asked of Mr. Pessoa, he did. That reflected well on Mr. Pessoa then and continues to do so today. And Mr. Pessoa, with all of that, has a family similar to that. I've had the opportunity to interact with his parents who are here today, who are devastated, as the court I'm sure knows, but they are absolutely lovely people. His fiancée and her family, I can't say enough about them. I've spent hundreds of hours with Mr. Pessoa in a professional and a personal capacity. I've spent many hours with his immediate family, all of whom I may add parenthetically were so loyal to Mr. Pessoa that they would come to the restaurant and lend their assistance. That's just the people that he was brought up with, he chose to be with as it pertains to his fiancée, and the person Mr. Pessoa is. I say that just as a glance into who Mr. Pessoa is. I've appeared before this court for years defending people. I've never had the role that I have today, which is to defend him, but also to give the court a personal side of a client, because it's never been my practice to do that. But I think the court knows counsel enough that given my choice to befriend Mr. Pessoa means something. The biggest responsibility this court has when it's bestowed the honor of being a judge in whether state or federal court is what is about to occur today, which is the sentencing and the liberty lost of an individual. And I don't think there's any greater power the court has. The court obviously has to show humility when it does that. It has to take into consideration what's just under the circumstances, what's reasonable under the circumstances, based upon not only the actions and the convictions for which the jury returned guilty verdicts on, but also Mr. Pessoa's personal character, Mr. Pessoa's lack of criminal record, the family and friends that are here in support of Mr. Pessoa, and certainly taking into consideration what sentencing needs to do. And Attorney Blake will touch on that. I will just ask the court to consider all that, which I'm confident that it will when it dispenses an appropriate sentence for Mr. Pessoa. Thank you.